Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Skift Meetings podcast, the podcast for curious event professionals. My name is Andrea Doyle, and I am the executive editor of Skift Meetings. In this episode titled Helen Bassett, The Power of a Story, I have the pleasure of chatting with Helen, the Senior Vice President of Live and Events for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. We talk about the details underway for the 6th edition of the Future of Everything Festival. We chat about how Helen has been impacted by being at the right place at the right time, the importance of sustainability at the Future of Everything Festival, and where Helen turns to when she needs inspiration of her own. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I invite you to check out other episodes of the Skift Meetings podcast with tips and insights from today's most influential event professionals. You can find all the episodes on our website or by subscribing to your favorite podcast service.
Helen Bassett, I'm the SVP of Live and Events at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Been working here now for the last 9 years, leading our events business, and been very lucky that my career has definitely grown, I think, in line with the business's ambitions for live and events as a means of growing business, connecting with audiences, and telling, stories about our brands.
And can you tell us about your journey as an event professional? Like, start when you first encountered business events and take us to your current role today.
Yeah, sure. We were laughing about this recently, actually. I'm definitely a case of right place, right time. I honestly don't think I even realized there was a business in events when I first started. So lucky really that I managed to find something that I like doing and something that I'm half decent at. And it really started when I joined a radio station back in the UK. And that right place, right time was a connection through a connection through a connection that said, come and interview for this role. And that's honestly where I learned about the value of events in marketing campaigns, in playing a strategic role and connecting with audiences, whether that's, at a trade level or a consumer level. And some hard hitting interview questions there, actually. I think one of my favorite and first interview questions was, what was the first gig that you ever went to? So maybe that was what got me in. But it all started from there. That's really how I found my in, and that's how I started to understand that there was a business there, and this was, a means of connecting with people and telling a brand story. And spent a decent amount of time mostly working in media, and I think that decision was probably more intentional than the coincidental move into events. Having studied journalism at university and always loved a good story, and spent a lot of work experience with magazines and local newspapers and such. So stayed in the media for a fair while before moving to Sydney, where I took a small hiatus from the media industry and started working in more of a consumer-facing brands and not-for-profit with various agencies. And then, fast forward a few years and came to New York to lead the team here at Dow Jones. And that's how I've got here, really. And now the role really goes a little bit further than just creating and imagining experiences, and more toward helping the business understand the strategic role that live events can play.
So did you move to New York for the job?
I did,
Okay.
yes. That was another lucky move. So I got to move, to Sydney for a short while, then back to London before coming here, all for the
Great
work.
cities you choose.
Yeah, I got some good
So
ones.
can you tell us a bit about the Wall Street Journal's Future of Everything Festival? It started in 2015, isn't that correct?
2018. So yes, and thank you for asking. So actually, next week we're going to be hosting our 6th iteration of the Future of Everything Festival. It's here in New York City. It's 3 days of multiple stages and experiences. And we've hosted everyone, or newsmakers, everyone from the likes of the former First Lady of the United States. We had Michelle Obama on stage last year. That was wonderful. As well as showcasing, some innovative companies who were at the earlier stages, I should say, of their businesses. And the genesis of the event really is that we bring together the leading thinkers and change makers to discuss everything from what's next in the way we live, the way we work, and the way we play. And to answer your first question, it was born in 2018. That was the first time that we actually brought the festival to life. And it was the live extension, if you like, of our Future of Everything content and coverage. And before we had the festival, we had a series of events that were more like episodes. They doubled down on specific content areas. And then the idea of the festival truly came around when somebody said, well, what if we just stitched all of these episodes together and created one sort of tentpole moment in New York where we could bring these conversations and these audiences together? So that's how it
And
started.
what is your average attendance?
It has varied, but we typically are seeing about 1,000 people come across the 3 days. And then with the virtual, we have a virtual extension as well. That definitely helped to scale in terms of audience, as you can imagine. But in person, across those 3 days, yeah, around 1,000 people.
And is it all on one stage, or can you explain a little bit about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think partly or part of what makes the festival feel like a festival to us at least is that there are multiple experiences happening at the same time. So we have two stages which run concurrently. One called the festival stage, one called the future stage. So that's happening throughout the two main days. And at the same time, we have an area which we call the lab, which is what we consider to be the kind of experiential extension to the festival. So that's we bringing those like Imagineers, the innovators, those kind of companies that are on the verge of, making their way into their respective industries so that the guests can really have the chance to see what's next in those respective industries and really have a chance to try them, taste it if it's, food and get their hands on products. And then in addition to that as well, we have a series of events which expand beyond the environment um, that we're in at Spring Studios, is where we host it, and we host a number of what we call chef's tables. We do a number of what we call give back days, or we partner with people like the Hudson River Park and the High Line, and we try and do some sort of charitable initiatives with respective partners around the city as well. This time as well, actually, we'll be hosting an experience in partnership with a Broadway show as well. So just trying to give audiences a taste of some of the best of the city as
And
well.
has this always been the format, or has it evolved throughout the years?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely evolved. So when we first started, it really was that idea of lots of small episodes stitched together to become one big tent moment. So we were at Spring Studios, where we've been since the beginning, and they've been wonderful partners. We took over one floor. We always had the two stages running concurrently, and we had a very small, what at the time we called our innovation lab. And then since then, especially since the pandemic, we've really been trying to think about how can we grow our reach around that neighborhood and around the city and create more experiences and opportunities for people to connect with the brand and the experience. And that's how we started to grow out the lab. And that's become a much bigger proposition now, and these other experiences that we have going on.
Because studies we've reported on show that the next generation event goer, like the current generation, they really want experiences like that. And sitting, in a ballroom listening to a speaker isn't enough.
Isn't it? Absolutely. And I think that's why I like this format, why I like this slightly non-linear format that we get from something with the festival, because it does feel a little bit more bite-sized in terms of the content. It's very easy for a guest to pop into one stage, pop into another stage, duck downstairs to experience something. Maybe that evening they're going out to be part of one of the chef's tables, and they might come back the next day to interact with the partners in the lab or the participants in the lab who they haven't seen yet, for instance. So definitely trying to, make that content and those experiences more digestible, in that
And
regard.
where do your attendees come from?
The majority are definitely the tri-state area. But then we do have, I'd say, a very small percentage are coming internationally, and then a mid to small percentage are coming from across the country as well. But mostly they are more
And
local.
is 1,000 attendees, is that your sweet spot? Is that where you want to stay, or do you plan to grow it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I always think that there's opportunity to grow, and maybe that comes in building out more of these experiences, that we were just talking to, honestly. But right now, it feels like a good number, and it means that we can hopefully create and serve up experiences that still feel personable and still feel meaningful and high touch, but also with a little bit of
And
scale.
can you explain a bit about the new Broadway experience?
Yeah, of course. So we've for the last couple of years actually, we have got in touch with various Broadway shows to see whether we can integrate that side of New York into the festival. So we've had a couple of performances and this year as well we'll have a performance. We're working with the Outsiders this year. So they'll be on stage, or a couple of character or cast members, I beg your pardon, will be on stage at the festival. They'll be part of an interview, there'll be a performance, and then in the evening, guests have had the chance to access tickets to, go and see that show, which is obviously in its early
That sounds
days.
great.
Yeah,
And
it's lots of fun.
sustainability is a big part of the festival, isn't it?
It is, and it's something that we're trying to make more and more of an effort with, to be honest with you. And this year, I'd say we've been able to do more than we have in years past. And efforts range from making sure that we're being thoughtful with regards to how we're serving food and drinks and such, and minimizing the number of single-use plastics and how we compost food and things like that aren't very, exciting but are very important, right through to thinking through how do we design set pieces and scenic in such a way that the materials are not only more sustainable in their originations, but or their origins, sorry, but more that those elements and those pieces can be used again in different capacities. So we built a stage last year that was designed in such a way it could be deconstructed and reconstructed in a local community garden. We've had one set piece that's about to be retired. It's, been on the road for a few years now, but it was built in such a way that it was modular, so it could be taken down and rebuilt again. And then this year as well, we've had a number of benches built that will just be seating around the festival, but they will, after, post event, be donated to various gardens around the city. So trying to be thoughtful in that
And I
regard.
read that some material was made into a sunshade.
That's right, yeah, so the set from last year that we used that's now in a community, garden has become this, like, veranda. It's very beautiful, and we were pleased that we could do it in such a way. You have to think through everything from, A, how does it make sense on stage at an event, but also how is it weatherproof if you're putting it up in a garden somewhere, when it could be sun
That's
or
great.
snow?
What event have you organized that you're most proud of?
That's a good question, and it's one that I always find really difficult, to be honest. I I think we're lucky that here at Dow Jones and with the Journal, we have a diverse and exciting portfolio of events that I've been able to work on. And, some I've inherited, some I've helped reimagine, some we've helped, produce from the ground up, but always tricky to single one out. And honestly, I feel like my answer probably changes every day. So I think I'm gonna do a slight cop out and say the ones that I'm probably most proud of are likely those which have come with the most complex journeys.
So, if you were to plan an event for 100 Helens, what would that event look like?
Well, thank you for asking. I'd love somebody to do that for me. Um, it would something that takes you away from the day to day. I'd say something with plenty of time outside, something with brilliant and beautiful hospitality, just a little bit of organized fun, and a full briefing because obviously by my very nature of what I do, I like to know everything that's about to happen.
Let's talk about the events industry as a whole. Are there any future trends that
Yeah.
you're most excited about?
Yeah, I think firstly, what's really reassuring, and I wonder, and I hope that you are seeing this as well, is just that events, live experiences, experiential, however you want to, define it, as a means of connecting with audiences and as a means of marketing, feels like it's becoming more and more important again. I mean, going back to what you said earlier about how, the younger audiences coming through are looking for meaningful experiences. I think that's certainly reassuring to see that trend on the rise. I think the a focus on, human connection and personalized experiences. It's something that we've certainly felt on the way out of the pandemic, that feels more and more important. I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier about these experiences that folks are looking for. And then I also think, a focus on sustainability, and it is reassuring to see that becoming more and more significant and more prevalent in the industry. And I feel like there's obviously a long way to go yet, but it feels like there's a focus and a dedication, and small steps are being taken. So I think that's encouraging to see.
What is your stance on the current AI evolution?
I think it's really interesting, and I think it's something that was certainly we're very curious about, and we have a team that's really trying to make sense of how AI can help support us in terms of how we produce these personalized experiences. Um, and some specific examples of how we're making the most of it is in different forms of, storytelling. So our team recently designed a mixed reality experience, which we called Sustainable Horizons. And the thinking around that is how we can reinvent and reimagine traditional storytelling, to underscore how AI is shaping the future of sustainable urban development, and the experience, from the narrative to the visuals to the sound beds was all created using AI, obviously with lots of human, sense checking along the way. But that experience was built using AI. So I think, we're trying to use it in a way that's thoughtful and hopefully helps us tell stories in different and interesting ways. And then also, and there's some examples of how we use it for productivity as well. Simple things like transcriptions that come from different interviews that are useful for multiple reasons. Using AI can, make that a more efficient process too. Again, with some human oversight before it's sent anywhere.
So AI is having an impact on the events industry. Do you see any other factors impacting events?
I think it's, what we were talking to earlier, honestly, from a non AI, do you mean from a tech perspective or
Just
just at
trends
large?
impacting events at large.
At large, I think I'd come back again to what we were saying earlier, just this sense of wanting to have more personalized experiences, more curated experiences, not necessarily wanting to be in a traditional linear experience anymore. Um, I think that's certainly what's most, I think, exciting for me when I see what's happening in the industry.
If you could change one thing in the events industry, what would it be?
Oof. Make it less expensive. Uh, less disposable. I feel like it's so much work goes into building these experiences. And then there's also something so kind of satisfying yet really sad about how quickly those experiences get taken down again.
Have you yourself participated in any events lately that really impressed you? And what was it that impressed you?
It's a good question. I was thinking about this. Um, and I'm gonna rewind a little bit actually, because I always really enjoy the opportunity to go to Cannes for the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity. Not least because obviously it's in a beautiful location, but more so because there are so many brands there activating and telling their story experientially in different ways. And I think it's so interesting to see what other businesses think is, cutting edge, and how best tell a story, and how people flex and sway based on what their brand proposition is and who their audience is. So that's always another sort of industry event that I find very interesting.
And how many people are on your team?
My direct team, there's
Okay.
35. So we're a big team.
And how do you build and nurture that team?
Yeah. So I think so we're a global team. I'll start there. Like the largest cohort is in, probably unsurprisingly, is in the US, but we also have a team based out of London and a team based out of Hong Kong. And honestly, I think as a global team, I think we actually benefited from the pandemic. We used to operate really as regional teams. And then when we all went virtual in 2020, we started to work together more kind of cohesively and collaboratively as a global team. And, lucky really that those habits and those ways of working have stayed. So I think that has certainly enabled us to hopefully nurture the team a little more, give folks different opportunities, make sure we put the right people on the right projects, and introduce new skill sets across the board.
And so I guess that's a benefit coming out of the pandemic that, like you said, you work more as a cohesive team. Were there any other learnings for
Yeah.
you from the pandemic?
I mean, yes, many, I think. I think like everybody really, we had to pivot very, very quickly. We had an event that was scheduled to take place. Ironically, it was our health event scheduled to take place not long after we all went into lockdown. And so there was definitely a good amount of innovative thinking and hustle, I'd say, that went behind, bringing that to life in the most effective way possible. So, um, the ability to be agile and nimble in the way we work, I'd say that's definitely an upside to what we've learned from coming through the pandemic. What else? Additionally, just the ability to reach audiences beyond those who are in the room, with you. You can connect audiences in different ways. And while personally, I think that the true value that we learn from that is that the human connection, the being in the room, the shared experience is what makes this business so valuable. That we've learned that you can do that in some regards in a virtual and scalable way was also a good learning for us.
And so, and your events, are they hybrid? Like you have a virtual component.
We do. I mean, less and less now, to be honest with you, not least because we're just hearing that feedback from our audiences that there is a demand to be back in person, to have that shared experience, to have that connection with that sort of curated audience. But there are a couple of events that we still do in a hybrid capacity. So next week's festival is still one of our hybrid events. And I think partly that one lends itself nicely to it of the, you know, because of the non-linear style of that event. Somebody could dip in, listen to a particular interview, and then dip in somewhere, throughout the day without having to commit too much time. And then the other two events that we still have as hybrid offerings are our Global Food Forum, which will take place later in June, and our Tech Live event, which is later in October.
So I do have to say, you seem very calm for someone who's having such a big event next week. Is stress a challenge?
I try to think of it as pressure rather than
Okay.
stress. So, and honestly, just benefit tremendously from having a really brilliant team. That team of 35 that I mentioned, that's just my core team. We work with so many people across this business to produce these experiences, and they're all so brilliant at what they do that makes it a little easier.
And we like to touch upon leadership a bit in our podcast. So I was curious, what are the key qualities or skills that have enabled you to be a successful leader?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'd start by saying that I'm, naturally quite an optimistic person. So I think that helps. And I'm also of the opinion that if we're here and we're working hard, then it should also be fun. So I try and think of it through that lens as well. Um, I would also say that I love a challenge and I love a problem. Like I love to try and fix things. So there's definitely expect the unexpected, but look for the solve. I think that's just a general sense I bring with me. And also a sense of calm. I think again, generally a relatively calm person. And then the other piece perhaps is being operationally driven by my nature and what I've been taught and both learned to do from this working in this business, but also always wanting to understand the bigger picture. So really always looking at what's the why. So being able to balance like the operational extensions with that bigger picture and that strategic outlook.
I like that, but always keep an eye on the why.
Always I'm obsessed with the why. What's the why?
And you said expect the unexpected with soul.
Expect the unexpected, but always have a soul.
Okay.
Well, I think that the general spirit of just you expect the unexpected, then it's much easier to come up with a
Oh, I
solve.
like that. Are there any people or organizations that you've learned from or partnered with that have been key in your career?
Yeah, there have been. I go back to that first job when I realized that events was a business and working with the radio brand and worked with two brilliant women who have become two brilliant friends. And they were definitely a great kind of inspiration and, place of learning when I first started, not least because they were onboarding me just generally in the business and in this industry, but more so because they had this a brilliant ability to, again, kind of blend the operational needs of events with strategic thinking. So I definitely credit that way of thinking to those two ladies. And then I'd also say from, a Dow Jones and a Wall Street Journal perspective, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of brilliant leaders and a lot of brilliant partners. And without naming names, I'd say I've learned everything there from knowing when to disagree, but to commit, from knowing the value of surrounding yourself with people who can do things better than you can, knowing that that's how you build a brilliant team. And then also from people who just have this wonderful ability to make the most complex situation feel very, very simple. And then I'd say beyond that, in the industry, some extraordinary partners that we get to work with, both here and in the UK and over in Sydney. And they've definitely taught me a lot, I think, about what it means to be a good leader, how to lead like teams in a really effective way, when to question and why to question, and when to challenge, but then also how to combine, technical thinking with creative thinking.
So last year, like you said, you had former First Lady Michelle Obama, you had New York City Mayor Eric
Yeah.
Adams, executives from companies like Slack and Google. How do you get, such visionaries to be part of the festival? And how do you outdo yourself year after year?
With lots of hard work. No, we so again going back to that team. So we have the team that I oversee, and then we work with different partners around the business. So we have close partners in the Wall Street Journal newsroom who are really setting the agenda for the event. They're really thinking through like the big thematic, angles we want to take, what's going to manifest for our audiences, but what also is going to help us, drive content and coverage. And so they're really thinking through that. They're working with my team. My team oversee programming as well, but really that imagination comes from that team, so they are following what's happening in the respective industries and thinking about who should be next, and who's got the leading voice on certain topics. And then others, I'd say, comes from years of building partnerships with people. Sometimes schedules don't work out, and somebody whom we thought would be a great get to have on stage a couple of years ago, maybe it didn't work out because of dates, but they are able to maintain and nurture those relationships. And if the content is still, relevant, then we're lucky if we can get them on stage in years to come.
What are you particularly excited about next week's event?
Next week, well, we have Elmo, so I think mostly people are excited about Elmo. That's the one that's going to get me some credibility with my children, at least. Like another a great diverse program, honestly, and the team have been really thoughtful of thinking like who are the leading voices, and who are like the innovative voices. And we think of it through the lens of, and partly you're coming because you see those big names, but whilst you're there, you're also discovering those new names as well, and that's part of the joy, I think, of this event.
Wow. Well, we always wrap our podcasts by asking who should be our next guest on the podcast.
So I've recently started working with these two brilliant women that run a company called Liberty and Co. I wonder if you've come across them in the past. And Liberty and Co is an experiential agency, and it's run by a lady called Erica. I'm going to mispronounce their last name, but Boeck, and Katie Murphy. And they are not only just extraordinary minds in terms of how they are building their business, but they're also really, really generous, I think, as professionals. They have something called the X list where they're spotlighting 100 different leaders in experiential. And I love always reading that. And I think they are definitely some great people to talk to. And they're actually next week hosting the XP Upfront. So my question would be to ask them about how that idea came around.
Anything else we should know about you or your work at Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal that we didn't touch upon?
No, this is great. I was going to finish by saying, are you free next week and would you like to come to the festival?
I would love to.
Well,
I'm
we'd love
going to be
we'd
traveling,
love to
but it's a date for next year.
next year.
Well,
Let's do
thank
it.
you so much for your time. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.